Hello and welcome to Arkk Solutions Tax Leaders Roundtable. My name is Stephen and today I am joined by some highly esteemed leaders within the tax professional in this sector. What I'm going to do is just go around the table and I'd like you to introduce yourself, give an overview of where you come from and the industry that you're in, and we can then open up the table to some interesting conversation.
My name is Zuhair Al-Ghafir. I work for the Pension Protection Fund. We are a bit unique probably because we operate in a way of not private, not public, similar to BBC. We look after pensioners who lost their pension when their companies went bust. The company was established in 2005 and currently we have about 250,000 pensioners. Some of them are active receiving salaries, some of them yet to get it. Investments about £30 billion. And we have some type of special treatment from HMRC when it comes to VAT, so we'll talk about it in a minute.
Very nice. Paula?
My name is Paula Mason. I work for a global investment bank based in London, where I head up the VAT function.
Mina Shah, I work for a loyalty benefits company. I'm head of tax there. I was brought in to set up a tax team for a growing organisation which is in the top 200 companies in UK.
My name is Stephen Tucker. I'm the Head of Services at Arkk Solutions. And Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris Smith. I am the indirect tax manager for a large global media group which includes publishing not just books but music and also programming as well. So, and I think my main purpose is to try and harmonise the various disparate elements of the group. So.
And I'm Jayesh Rajguru, Global Head of Tax for a premium listed group. Operate mainly in training, networking, events kind of space. And yeah, initially I was brought in to help to create the tax department, and one of the big things that's come out of that is actually the focus on technology and how we can use that to create hopefully a better department going forwards.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much and welcome today. You all come from a very different industry sector. And you're established tax leaders, and one of the things I'd like to thrash out in a little bit of detail is how important is it to know the business and to know the industry that you work in when it comes to tackling all the obstacles that you deal with on a day-by-day, whether it's compliance or advisory. I sort of like to understand your day role and how that knowledge of your industry and the business processes is important, if someone could take that.
Within my area, definitely I need to understand the business. Probably not to answer a tax question, but understanding the systems and the data inside the system will help calculate the tax, the right way. So yeah, I don't answer tax questions directly, but I answer the tax people when they need help to use technology.
It's interesting, you act as a bridge between tax and technology is playing a really big part in tax.
True, that's correct.
I'm finding now I'm having a lot more conversations with the various IT departments to say what we need to change in the system, what needs to be set up, contingencies for if something happens, all sorts of things. So we talked earlier about having accounting knowledge, but now we need a bit of IT knowledge as well to know what the systems are capable of and what kind of timeframes there are and what kind of resource is needed to get to where we need to go as well. So I think there's a kind of a third strand there to add into the conversation.
That's true. Actually, it makes a huge difference when you have someone within the team who can be, as you said, the bridge between IT department and finance department. Each one of them has an amazing knowledge in their area, but when they try to talk to each other, you need this bit of translation. And that's probably my role, and that's where we can add value.
Probably one of the problems that I find is when you're dealing with IT people that may be either in England or abroad in our head office, sometimes it'd be nice if they had some sort of background to the tax as well, because there's a little bit of a barrier there sometimes. You need them to have an understanding of how VAT works in order for any IT system to be able to operate correctly.
I think it's definitely a two-way street there.
It's a balance.
I think we do take a lot of burden in trying to upskill ourselves, but I think actually, something I've been trying more recently is actually delivering a bit of tax training to the IT and to the systems teams. Very high level, nothing too scary, but just to, again, give the same kinds of awareness, because I think that's where we can work. the best together, absolutely.
Would you say that you're pretty comfortable with technology, its capability? Does it have a defined role within the tax department or your organisation? I'd be quite interested to hear the views of that.
Yeah, I think in this day and age, I think you have to at least have an appreciation of technology. And I think when we say technology, I think, quite often we immediately just think about, a particular piece of software. But I think actually it's a bit wider than that. The way in which we trade, the way in which we do business generally is so much wider than it was in the past. And, some of us have got creaking ERP systems which were designed in an era before that. And I think we need to be very aware of, one, what tax requirements do we think need to be satisfied? We're talking reporting, compliance, and so on, but also moving more fundamentally, actually, what can we then use our existing data for to then help drive improvement and to drive change within our own functions and across the business? So, certainly in tax departments, we have massive amounts of information. The kind of granular detail that we normally need to prepare is far in excess of a lot of general accounting teams. And we can use that actually to then drive data analytics. We can use that to drive different forms of presentations. We can give insight into our businesses. And I think actually as a tax function, we should start being more cognizant of that in addition to the advantages technology give us in being able to do our day jobs. But I think the term tax technologist is always a little bit scary because I'd say certainly within tax, you're always on a learning curve. It's very difficult to truly feel like an expert with the pace of change. But I think equally, we do need to be starting to upskill ourselves and at least become comfortable with technology, even if we can't quite take the leap and become a systems person ourselves.
It's really interesting to sort of understand, your tax or finance, the sort of micro-environments in which you operate in terms of your own unique industries. These are interesting times in which we find ourselves. And I think no different to understanding your roles and the companies in which you operate. Why do you think these are interesting times?
I think at the moment the only certain thing is everything is uncertain. So
Nicely summarised.
The one thing is get your fundamentals, your structure in place, the processes, your controls right, and make sure you've got good quality information. Without that, you really can't do anything. And that takes a lot of time and effort, not just from the tax team. Tax shouldn't be driving this. This should come from top down, and the business as a whole should be driving that change. So that it's a change in culture, but also the way you work. And it doesn't just impact finances across the business. Technology impacts across the business.
I think one of the problems is it's very uncertain as to what the quality of the data is until you actually do a deep dive into it. So I think it's a really good opportunity for all these companies to get their houses in order. But I think another important element is to document it properly too, because people move around, so somebody could take on a task, do something right, they leave, somebody else comes in, there's no sort of handing over procedures so I think it's very important to get the documentation right as well as part of the overall process.
And I think particularly given the kind of digital era that we're in now, I think, traditionally if you lost a file, you lost a file. I think to say that you've lost all your digital files and there's no backup, I think actually that's no longer really an acceptable position to have. So, absolutely having contemporaneous documentation saved down properly in some kind of logical structure is becoming paramount.
So here, I'd love to hear your technologist slant.
From a technology point of view, when tax people are working, they historically, probably in the traditional way, they had all documents, as you said, in front of them. They are dealing with them. Now, technology is getting more and more complicated. You can't ask somebody who specializes in task to look at the system as well, to follow up with all these technology changes. Like there are systems like the system we have. It gets upgraded, one of them every month. And you really need to catch up with all these things. Tax people always need somebody to support them. Now this somebody, as we said, need to understand their troubles at least and try to tackle it and benefit from the new technology. There's new technology almost every day. That's why I see tax cannot be disconnected from technology at all. It's getting more and more stuck with technology. And even when we see the changes in governmental requirements, now I think probably the time where the tax person is not only tax, they either need somebody to support them, or they need to be half technology, half tax?
I think also tax authorities expect a good tax governance structure and a good governance structure, and not just within tax, but also the other regulatory requirements on governance that have been brought in. It's all sort of, it's like the departments are working together effectively, not just the tax HMRC, but other government departments are working together to make sure that the business is compliant, has a good governance structure, and it's become more and more important.
You're all super busy professionals. I mean, one of the things that came out was we had a mix from sort of the regulatory drive outside the organisation and also the increasing digital drive among the digitalisation of tax, but also just getting some of the basics in order, just in tightening up procedures and being aware of technology. So, you know, you can see a sort of mix in terms of what the daily priorities are. Now, one of the things to next introduce is, you know, the word innovation doesn't necessarily sit that comfortably within, I suppose, tax. But I would ask, and you know, where would you see opportunities for innovation within your own tax department or your team when it comes to all the things we just spoke about now? If anyone could take that.
Certainly from a tax perspective, where we've got processes that can be automated to free up people's time, the more we can automate, the better. And that's something that I'd be looking to do over the next few years. But again, it relies on good fundamentals that we talked about earlier. Without that, there's no point in automating. But automation, particularly on processes that are repeated, on the compliance side, the more we can do, the better.
Absolutely. I think it makes no sense that we've got in our teams really, you know, intelligent, really ambitious people, and we're getting them to churn out the same stuff on a regular basis when actually it's the very definition of process automation is just doing the same repetitive task. But I think also there's opportunity in the way in which we think and the way in which we interact with the business. So I think, you know, when we talk about innovation in tax, you know, it's always going to be a hard sell because tax is quite often seen as, you know, a cost that just needs to be reduced in some areas. But I think equally, it's more about showing that tax is more than just some bod sitting in the corner churning out numbers that will go into an annual report. And actually, you know, I think we've got a lot to do in terms of business partnering, and I think we've got a lot to offer by using both our own skills and the time that we can gain from being freed up by using technology to automate a lot of these rudimentary tasks, and actually being able to get back out there and to embed ourselves within the business a lot better.
I think there's a big opportunity there in terms of freeing up time, because if we can implement kind of automation of the kind of basic kind of tasks like the basic line box VAT return, other bits and pieces like that, then the argument is that you'd free up more resource to go look at the business in more detail, and then the better data, the better compliance follows on from that. And I think that's like a key thing to take to the main stakeholders, to say that, you know, that while it might require some investment now, in the long term it's going to pay off in terms of better compliance record, more time for the tax team to look at the more important, kind of more difficult areas of the business.
Yeah, and I think quite often we hide behind, you know, bad data. And I think, you know, the data's bad. I think we can all just accept that. You know, no reasonably sized organisation is going to have perfectly clean data. It's just the very nature of it. But I think you're right. I think we need to just make the leap. You know, we know it's going to be a slog, but I think it's about being able to then project that forwards. You know, if we constantly hide behind the argument that our data is terrible, which, you know, it certainly is. I mean, I've worked in organisations where, you know, we really should have probably been a lot more worried about about the quality of our information. But I think if we make those initial efforts to help clean that up, you know, that's partly on us, that's partly on the rest of the business. I think you're right. I think we can use that to then help ourselves drive forward and to get back out there.
Yeah, I think a kind of dovetailing point on that is the fact that, you know, tax authorities, not just in the UK but all over the world, they are wanting to get in on the kind of digital side of things. So the issue is, in terms of regulation, in terms of compliance, that their requirements are slowly going up. And if we kind of stay stagnant, don't do anything, then the issue is we might have been compliant like a year ago, but now is like we're nowhere near it. So we've got to do that. The option of doing nothing is not there.
No, it isn't. It's very much driven by what the tax authorities are doing, and HMRC has already started on the journey. So in one respect, that's quite good. It helps us where, you know, we need to strengthen our processes and particularly our repeat processes and things where we can use technology. That's one way of actually getting the buy-in from the stakeholders.
What I'd love to hear from is, as I think we've established that innovation is quite important, but what would we typically see as the blockers to doing, to automating processes, or at least bringing change? And I'd be really interested to hear what the blockers are within your organisation towards that, if that's okay.
I manage this all the time.
Okay.
The first reason of blockage is change is not always welcome. If you're used to do something, you're comfortable with it, it's your comfort zone, and suddenly you say, now the new system, you have to change all the process, you have to come next morning doing something kind of completely different. There is always this kind of resistance. This one reason. The other reason, in my opinion, people think that technology or automation will make them lose their jobs. I would say it from my previous experience in different organizations, majority of them private companies where cost saving is important, and yet when you automate something, you don't really lose people. You change the rules. So instead of being a data processor, just sitting a whole day, just looking at an Excel sheet and finding the errors, now a system will do that. I'll go and analyze this data and try to find something valuable in it. If it's in tax, find a way to reduce the tax bill. If it's in costing, in billing, in whatever area, you can always add some value, even in training other people or whatever. So to answer your question again, it's always the comfort zone and the worry that the rule will disappear if data processing has gone, the manual data processing has gone.
Also, it's a huge investment into systems which have been around for years and years, which need vast improvements to be able to make them automotive. And that's the other problem I see as well. And you cannot also overlook the fact there's always going to be human error as well.
I think budget's always going to be the big one, isn't it, really? And I think, I think it's not budget in the sense that, we've got CFOs that are trying to be cheap. I think it's more actually it's because it's so new. The concept of investing in systems from a tax perspective. Traditionally it would just be the bolt-on on an ERP, or you'd get a tax engine in, and there'd be a bit of a tax investment there. I think to talk about using technology to innovate the way in which we run an entire department, I think that's the educational piece that probably that's the bit I need probably the most help with, is how do I develop that business case to show, I can talk about the benefits. I think that's pretty clear. But what can be difficult to say is, look, there's going to be this upfront cost and this upfront resource requirement to get everything in place. And actually at a time when, there's always going to be tightening pressures, and CFO is always going to be under pressure, everyone's coming to them to get some piece of the pie. How do we in tax get a sufficient piece that means we can do it properly? Because I think that's always the other risk, that we can't quite scope enough of it to get a good solution. And so it doesn't work like we expected, and then that then hampers any future potential that we might have. I think if we're going to do it, we need to do it properly, and it's just trying to get that case out there to say, look, this is really going to be worthwhile.
But you do need a roadmap and do it in stages, and then that's where the budget will come in. I think the other bit is resource and people's time. It takes up a lot of people's time, and they've already got a day job. So this is in addition to that day job, so it needs to get that buy-in, and you probably need additional resource to actually help you get to where you want to go. And it's across the whole business. The whole business needs to be on board. It's not just finance, because other parts of the business actually contribute to the information that tax certainly uses.
So I think with the technology coming, it's much easier to buy systems, or just like move from the manual way, which is safe and easy to, or actually I wouldn't call it easy, safe, into something cloud-based where it will help everyone to automate.
I think there's a problem there though, because I don't know if other industries are the same as financial industry, but I think a lot of banks are worried about the information security side of a cloud-based software provider. So that's definitely been mentioned in my organisation quite a lot, as is it safe to use such solutions?
I completely agree. it's the security aspect of cloud-based solution systems, and also GDPR, which is something else that you have to comply with. And in a regulated industry, you've got, and also other industries that my organisation has, you've got to be very careful what systems you bring in. It's easy to get seduced by all of the new technology out there, but you need a solution that works for you. But first, get your fundamentals.
I think I definitely agree. But I think sometimes, absolutely the cybersecurity space is something that has to be at the forefront when we think about these kinds of implementations. But sometimes I feel like it's a little bit, I think financial industry is a little bit different. Obviously I don't operate in that space, so we've probably got simpler requirements in that sense. But I think sometimes for some of our industries, it's a little bit overcooked as to how big a risk this is. When I think about some of the organizations I've worked with in the past, I'd probably say that we've got better security going with a good quality technology provider who've got a series of safeguards in place compared to the systems we have in-house, when in some cases we've just got random NAS boxes kind of plugged into random outlets. Effectively, like, we talk about being worried about our data, but I think actually sometimes if we go with a decent provider, we've got access to full enterprise level security there that we just couldn't afford in an organisation of our size. And just the fact that we can take advantage of their economies of scale. I think there's still, that's not to say the risk is completely gone, but I think there's definitely work we can do with providers like Arkk to say, actually, look, this is our problem. How can we deal with it? How are you going to deal with it? And I think if we can get that comfort there, then I think that can help to open that door a little bit.
Does anyone have any tips and tricks at how they've learned to drive that change within the organisation when it comes to a tax perspective, whether it's investment in a new solution or it's, you mentioned data and reports and systems earlier. Does anyone have any experience in terms of how you bring that change into the organisation and maybe change the mindset?
First of all, it doesn't need to be a huge change.
Okay.
Sometimes you can do it gradually. So you need to build the trust within the middle management. So when they start to see a value of stop wasting a full-time person on wasting the time of full-time person on just manual work in Excel, they start to say, okay, you know what, if we have a better system, then I can have 2 or 3 resources then. And then start to move this way. And if you can convince one particular layer of management, they will do their job to go a little bit higher and help in spending on technology.
I think coming from my perspective, in our group there are kind of several VAT groups, there are several individual entities, and I think the issues I have is that there are big companies, and they have some of them might have a lot of manual process that's left over from years ago, and they can just instantly see the value. They can say, oh well, we can free up these people to do this and this and this, so okay, that's fine. We can invest in something, but I think the other end of the spectrum, there are the small companies, and they're going, well, why do we need to invest in anything? Because it's just a spreadsheet, you just bang it into the VAT return, click, it's done, and why do we need to have anything more? So I think there is the kind of the two ends of the spectrum. So I suppose in my case, I just said, right, we're a big group. It would make no sense for us to use 15 different things. So we need to use the same thing, and we can spread out any kind of costs or anything like that as appropriate. So so I think in terms of the buy-in, I think ironically the bigger companies see it more, because they can see the advantages of having a solution. But then you've got the small companies who are quite happy clicking on the spreadsheet, doing something in a single spreadsheet, then clicking it off. They have a harder time buying in, because they've got to invest in something that they're okay, they've got to do it. If it's like making tax digital, they've got to do it. But they say, well, why can't we just bang a spreadsheet off? So I think from my perspective, it's kind of getting the buy-in as the entire group and saying, let's have a single harmonized process so it's the same for everybody, and that kind of unifies the process, helps with the compliance, and then there's an obvious benefit to kind of things like our relationship with HMRC, the nature of the data we're getting. We're not getting like 100 different data sets. We're getting single data sets going into one thing, and then it's coming out the end submitted to HMRC in terms of the compliance and the automation and the returns. So from my end, I think it's kind of going forward as a group and getting the buy-in from multiple parties, in the sense that not just the big ones who see the obvious merit, but kind of the small ones who might not see it now, but if they can see it, how it will benefit us as a group, it would be a lot. They can see the kind of positives are.
For small companies, if we look 10 years back, to buy a system and have on-premise server and have IT team to look after it and manage support, all that is scary. And especially the first check you have to pay is really, really big. Now with this cloud solutions, first of all, on cash flow is really simple, it's very easy. If you tell a director, you need to spend £300 a month to manage this. It's much easier than tell them, you have to spend now 30,000 and it will be kind of a bit less later. So with the cloud solution, it's helping a lot to buy technology, because first of all, on the cash is not a big issue. Second, you don't see this big fat number that you have to pay at start. And again, you don't need to worry much about resources. You don't need to have 3 IT specialists sitting in the office just to help you with it. You can always pick up the phone and get the support from the cloud solution providers. So I think with the technology coming, it's much easier to buy systems, or just like move from the manual way, which is safe and easy to, or actually, I wouldn't call it easy, safe, into something cloud-based where it will help everyone to automate.
I think if we just reshape around the question, it was the blockers to change, but it sounds like, I suppose, the IT blockers are quite substantial. Does anyone have any tips or tricks that they could offer up in terms of, getting the approval for a particular supplier, or winning over the IT team in terms of advising them that, a given supplier has a very secure environment?
Well, there's always the question about the reputation of the supplier. Now, Google gives you everything, kind of. First of all, you need to start with see what's available. Probably all of us know that the happy customer usually keep quiet. The unhappy customer is so loud. Now with the online world, it's so hard for a supplier or a solution provider to hide themselves. At the early stage, probably there is nothing, but once they go live with their solutions, if they are not good, people will tell they are not good. Now, if we look at it the other way around, if I don't find any bad reviews, I would assume it's good. Second, of course, you need to prove it, that it has any value for you. It's like if you know that a process is taking only 1 hour every 3 months from a person, and they are doing it pretty well on an Excel sheet, how do you go and spend hundreds of thousands on it? So you need to justify the cost. If there is a need to spend, you need to justify it, and usually this comes with the human capital. Okay. Majority of companies, they look at the human cost probably more seriously than the financial cost.
Going back to the automation question again.
Yeah.
To sort of maybe test your mettle when it comes to predictions and where tax is going, HMRC in the next few years aim to be the most digitally advanced tax authority globally. Now that is, from where we are, I think quite an ambitious statement, but I was wondering, in terms of the initial rollout around MTD, what do you see as next on the cards in terms of HMRC's MTD campaign? I'd like to get some predictions from you.
Where the bigger piece is going to be is possibly, looking at some of the other territories across the world. I think HMRC are going to be looking more for inspiration, not so much on just the linking, but I think in terms of what levels of access can then be kind of brought forward from there, and moving towards almost like a real-time information space. So kind of as transactions are running through, to be able to have some form of access to see what those kinds of transactions are, the treatment of those transactions. And I think a big issue for, I think, a lot of firms is, we deal with teams where, because of the pace of work, sometimes mistakes are made, but then they correct them. So if you just pulled out a ledger, you'll have a series of entries. A couple of them look a bit weird, but then they get corrected, so your end number's correct. I think one of the things to think about is actually, is there then going to be more scrutiny on how teams are behaving in terms of how that data is getting into the system? I think to make that statement, even in 4 or 5 years' time, I think it's going to be a big stretch. We've obviously got the B word kind of overhanging us as well, which is going to take a huge amount of time. But I think it's definitely not a stretch of the imagination to see that that is probably the direction where HMRC, and I think to an extent a lot of tax authorities across the world want to go down.
We're certainly investing in data analysts. All tax authorities are replacing, well, tax inspectors who are retiring or left. They're recruiting more in terms of data analysts. And in terms of HMRC, I think they will look at where the tax gap is biggest and where they can automate more. So in my opinion, I think income taxes will be the next one. And it is partially done anyway if you're on a payroll, because when you complete your self-assessment, you will get your details already on your tax return. You just have to basically check to see if they're correct. So I think income tax will be next. I think corporation tax will be the last one. And it'll be more around probably the start off with a P&L and then see what happens. Tax authorities, they talk to each other all the time. They exchange information. But again, you need resource for that. And I just wonder how much resource HMRC has in terms of people to actually move this forward. So it will take a while. I think it'll take a while. They'll get there, but it'll take a while.
Yeah, I'd echo that point, because I think there's a kind of like short-term, a medium-term and a long-term side to this, because I think in the short term, I think HMRC will look to the kind of more easy wins kind of things, so if there's easier things to automate. So for example, I think initially making tax digital for VAT had a more grandiose requirement in terms of almost transactional level data at some point, but then it got scaled down, so it's just the standard 9 boxes, which is the current norm. So I think in the short term we're going to see similar steps in terms of the other taxes, kind of income, corporation, things like that, but just in terms of the figures. And then in the kind of more medium and longer term, we might see the requirements increase, because if they get the initial automation through the door, and that's kind of just opens the floodgates to the kind of more transactional level. So I think in the short term we're seeing the kind of the easy wins, just the click to submit, you know, the APIs, the links, digital links, things like that. But in the more longer term, that's going to open out, and we're going to see a lot more information requirements going forward.
And also with the taxes, you mentioned VAT, partial exemption. The other thing is, Tom's, that's very hard to automate. It requires a lot of judgment, and at the moment, I don't think the technology is there within HMRC. I don't believe it's there. So that'll take a long time in coming, but as I said, they'll start off with this low-hanging fruit, and then
with the digitalization, they are getting too much data, much more than before. If they want to go with the VAT as digital ink, they will have access to much more records and transactions than before. Would they have the capacity to deal with it?
It's how they interpret the data and how well they understand the business. So that's the question. And I think if they understand the business, they'll interpret the data accordingly. So it's just a question of how well they understand the business to interpret the data.
And I think fundamentally it comes back to the resource point. You know, at the end of the day, in order to do all of this, there still needs to be people on the ground there. And, you know, I mean, I'd say the HMRC has been, you know, doing quite well given how hard the department's been hit over the last few years in terms of numbers. You know, there's still a huge amount of work that they do need to do. But I think the flip side here is actually just that a volume of data is going to need huge investments on their part. One, just to be able to receive and process it, but I think secondly, to get the kinds of analytics that they want to come out of it, to then help change behaviour and to drive the way in which taxpayers effectively approach their taxes. I think that's going to need a complete step change in the way in which they operate. And I think it'll be interesting to see if that goes hand in hand, or whether we end up with similar thing to making tax digital for VAT, where we have this great plan, but it's just getting deferred year on year because actually it's just not physically capable at this stage. I could actually also potentially see if one of the other tax authorities across the world, if they end up making a move in a similar line, you could quite easily see HMRC trying to import that system straight in. I mean, you know, we saw something similar with XBRL accounts when that first came in, for example, and also with in terms of their own internal systems, you know, trying to model it off things like the Australian Tax Authority. So I think we could also maybe see how that might work, and that could be helpful for us if it's not an entirely new way of doing things. But I think certainly it's a very uncertain future ahead.
In terms of, so we're here talking about HMRC and the UK. In terms of your global remit or any sort of international flavour when it comes to challenges faced in other tax jurisdictions, is the UK on your top 3 list of bothersome countries, or what other jurisdictions do you currently face issues with?
I think the UK is always going to be at the top. I mean, UK-headed group, I think it's always going to be up there. That's it's going to be the biggest number, the one that always has the most scrutiny. I think what's been interesting is there's been a number of changes worldwide. So dealing with SAFTI in Poland, dealing with some of the real-time reporting requirements in a couple of the other territories. Actually, the follow-on effect from GST in India, for example, that's been quite interesting. It's that's now starting to come together really, really well, having a single set of rules to work from. Equally, Middle Eastern VAT, GST, that's been a really interesting time, actually, seeing how quickly a tax authority can actually develop a framework and to then have to try and implement it. I think that's certainly a worrying model if that's then blueprinted out across to other territories.
Well, tax authorities do look at what others are doing, and they do replicate where it suits them. And tax introduction of VAT in the Middle East, it was one of them. They looked at the European VAT model. Mm-hmm. So in that respect, as sitting where we are, it makes it a little bit easier for us to deal with and ask the right questions and actually to implement that. So there are pluses and minuses, but they do talk to each other. It's just in terms of where the UK will be in terms of the most advanced, it's a matter of time. It depends what resource they have and how long it'll take them, because other countries are already there yet, like Mexico, Spain is catching up, Brazil, all of some of the South American countries, they're already done some of the basic work, Brazil. So, it'll be...
Yeah, actually, I mean, if you take Brazil's been quite interesting, actually, recently in the news about aligning their TP rules to OECD, which is fantastic. And I think, actually, that's hopefully the direction we see more authorities going to, is actually, kind of working off the initial approach for BEPS, in the sense that having some form of harmony across the world. I think that can only make our jobs simpler, in the sense that we'll have a more unified framework to work from. It's just the question is actually how that's implemented, and then if we then have the unilateral approach from some of the countries coming out to throw a spanner in the works.
Yeah, I'm not sure there will be harmonization in the short term. All the countries, they've got different requirements, different drivers. I mean, just taking the BEPS work and the project, they had to scale down, and their eventual conclusions and reports that they came out with had to meet a lot of requirements. A lot of it was scaled down. So that's going to be difficult. Countries have different requirements, and everyone wants the same piece of the pie. We're caught in the middle.
So you guys have been offering up loads of great insight into your day roles. I think what we might do, just to wrap up, is what do you think is for the next 6 to 12 months, what's the biggest challenge within your role that will occupy you for the next 6 to 12 months, whether it's Brexit or whether it's MTD? I'd love to get that insight.
Given that our deadline is October, we were lucky, so over the coming 3 months it will be making tax digital an important bit now. We don't know what will happen after Brexit, so we have to wait till after October to see.
Okay.
Same. Making tax digital has got to come top for us.
MTD, but also Brexit and what comes after it, and embedding the changes we've had to make because of Brexit, and make sure that goes through so smoothly. But then looking forward a little bit is where we can automate and starting that thought process and starting the conversations.
I'm going to echo everyone else. Okay. It's going to be MTD and Brexit again, and I think it's just for us, because we do deal in goods, so we're looking at kind of the supply chains. We're looking at kind of any customs issues as well, potentially going forward, and we are preparing for the worst case no deal scenario on that front. So between MTD and Brexit, that's the big ticket items there.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess MTD has to be the one at the forefront. If you look at the last couple of years, it's been very much, we don't have any idea whatsoever. So you kind of have a load of models, and I think now we're kind of zoning in on, okay, what are the last kind of 2 or 3 options that we think we're looking at? I think wider than that, kind of with the 12-month outlook, certainly for me, the big things I want to try and tackle is, as part of actually that MTD process, is the way in which we run VAT generally through our systems and in terms of the knowledge our people have so that they can better apply themselves, and TP documentation. I think just moving away from it being a little bit piecemeal and you know, a thought that kind of has to happen to actually bringing it into a more contemporaneous approach that, look, you know, first let's standardise our documentation generally, and then let's start a regime of being able to stay on top of that going forward. I think it's probably a little bit more aspirational. We'll see if the time's there for it, but that's certainly what I'd like to be focusing on.
What I'd like to do is thank you very much for your contributions today and wrap up Arkk Solutions Tax Leaders Roundtable. Thank you, Zahir, Paula, Mina, Chris and Jayesh. Thank you very much for your time today.